Welcome to today's special Soulstar Space live session. Can space get hacked and securing space? I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Soulstar's Director of Cyber Operations, Ian Kelly. Welcome to this special session.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by giving us just a little bit of background on yourself, Ian.
So I'm a an IT security professional. I've been tinkering with computers since I was 13 years old, and I've done a lot in a lot of different areas. I think I'm what you would call an IT generalist. I've worked a lot with. I've helped small businesses with their IT needs and deployment. Uh, I've worked on cybersecurity issues. I've worked on web development and application development. And what I'm really excited about is educating people. So it's good to be here.
Absolutely. And I understand that you worked previously with Soulstar in some of the early development stages on a couple of the space flights.
Yeah. So how I got involved with Soulstar is a really fun story that we don't have time to go into. But I first met Soulstar's founder, Brian Barnett, on Christmas Day of 2017. And it was a huge rush. And he got me involved in doing the programming and payload integration for the Schmidt space communicator, which is now in the Smithsonian. And we flew that space communicator, that piece of hardware, I believe April of 2018, on a Blue Origin New Shepard flight, and we sent a tweet from above the Kármán line over a private connection, which actually made history, which is why it's in the Smithsonian now.
Amazing. First
Yeah.
tweet from space, right?
Well, no, but it was the first tweet that was over a commercial satellite communication from a link from above the Kármán line.
Oh, gotcha.
I've been tweeting from the ISS for a long time, but they used the government TDRS system to communicate with the ground. So,
of course.
And it was also the first Wi-Fi hotspot, commercial Wi-Fi hotspot in space. There is a Wi-Fi hotspot on the ISS as well, but we were the first people that that created a Wi-Fi hotspot that devices could connect to and send data, and that's how we sent our tweet. So that was a really exciting project. It was really fun. That we could do a whole nother session on just that adventure.
Great. Well, I'm sure we will. So I really want to jump into the whole security topic. And maybe we can start by just talking about what today's biggest cybersecurity risks are for spacecraft.
Yeah, it's good that you say spacecraft, since we titled this talk, can space get hacked? And space itself getting hacked would be pretty cool, and there's some physics experiments along those lines, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're talking about spacecraft, and we're mostly specifically talking about spacecraft in low Earth orbit, which means satellites. So an interesting fact about satellites, in February of 2021, there were about 6,500 satellites orbiting Earth. Today, that number is up to just under 8,000. So in the past 18 months, we've had a 25% increase in the number of artificial satellites that are orbiting the Earth. That's a huge attack surface. And the answer is yes, satellites can get hacked. It has happened. One of the earliest examples that I'm aware of was in 1998. There was a German space telescope that got taken over, was compromised. There was a cyber attack, and it reorientated itself in a way it wasn't supposed to, pointed some instruments toward the sun, and those instruments were damaged.
Oh, no.
There have been other incidents as well. You can fast forward to today. Just this year, as part of the ShmooCon security conference, some security researchers, with permission from the Canadian government, did a demonstration where they compromised a Canadian telecommunications satellite and used it to broadcast their YouTube live stream to the whole North American continent for a brief amount of time. When we talk about satellites, we're talking about technology in space, and that technology in space has communications abilities to us here on the ground. So just like any technology that we are able to communicate with, it can get compromised. It can get sent commands from an unauthorized third party or have malicious software uploaded and running on it. It's kind of a different, it's a different ecosystem than what we're used to here on Earth, but that doesn't mean it's not vulnerable, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a big target on it for quite a few different reasons.
Sure. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that with the amount of investment in space, and it's cybersecurity in space is something that you're going to hear a lot about when you talk about the space industry today. Both NASA and ESA are taking it very seriously. There's been recently NASA has a new-ish cybersecurity head who's been talking a lot about kind of the language barriers. When we started launching satellites in the 1950s, we were looking to build devices that would last a long time in the very harsh environment that they're in, would be reliable. We weren't really thinking would be secure or would be secure from the kind of cyber attacks that we're used to seeing today. So, and a lot of those satellites are still up there. Someone said something to me really recently, which was interesting. In space, only software can repair. That's really true. In space, only software can update security too. You can't, if your satellite has a hardware vulnerability in it and it was launched in the late 1990s, you're probably not going to be able to go up there and correct that vulnerability. You'll have to correct it with a software patch. And so, but now I think people are really wanting to shift towards designing with a security mindset to thinking securely. So there's a lot to say about that. But.
Right. So why are our existing satellites at risk?
Well, why is anything at risk? Existing satellites are at risk because they're potential targets and because there'd be various incentive to try to compromise them. So everything is at risk. Your phone is at risk. Your car is at risk. Security researchers have demonstrated, the ability to take over a car and send it commands remotely, as part of just attacks on IoT devices. Satellites are no different than that. They're computerized technology in space, as I said. So existing satellites may be more at risk because they, especially older satellites, weren't designed with thinking about the kinds of cyber attacks that we're seeing today and the kinds of security threats that we're seeing today.
Yeah. So I think you've talked about the different attack surfaces that are available when you talk about satellites.
Yeah. Well, so just going back briefly to the previous point, as part of recently in 2020, the Air Force had a Hackasat competition. And one of the things that came out of that was this cool project called NionSat, which is it's instructions for using cheap components to build your own ground station. And so, anyone with a few $100s and an Amazon account or access to an electronics store is able to build. You can go build a little ground station that can track satellites, can communicate with satellites, can detect radio signals from satellites, and that exposes like that attack surface right there. That kind of capability exposes satellites to all kinds of tampering, tinkering, but also just all kinds of cool. Just amateur tracking and hobbyist experimentation, which is cool because it's opening space up to everyone. It's opening the ability to tinker with space technology up to everyone, but that in and of itself increases the attack surface like you were talking about. When we talk about, so going back to the question you just asked, when we talk about attack surface of satellites, we're usually looking, the standard is to kind of look at 4 different segments of where satellites can be compromised. So we call those the ground segment, which is going to be your ground station, and where your command center or whatever is talking to the satellite. Your link segment, or your transmission segment, which is the ground station's communication with the space segment, which is the satellite itself. And then you also have the user segment, which is in a communications satellite, that would be if you're talking on a satellite phone or you're using a satellite modem, you're the end user there. For the kind of technology that Soulstar is developing, though, we also have concerns about user segment because we're providing communications links to objects in space, and we're allowing people to sort of treat their space assets as like an IoT device that you would access just over the internet, which means that we've just exposed, in addition to exposing your technology to the convenient access from your computer, real-time persistent communications, we've also exposed that asset to the entire world and everyone that's connected to the internet. And so there are steps that we need to take huge steps that we need to think about when we're talking about securing the user segment. So these different segments, we could spend multiple sessions on the various kinds of cool technology that can secure assets and computers. I think encryption is important, authentication is important, but I'm going to ask you if you know this, Lisa, because you probably heard me say it a million times. What is the number one cause of data breaches?
The users themselves.
Users themselves. It's not just the number one cause, it's around 90%.
Oh my gosh.
The vast majority of those breaches are weak or mishandled passwords. So it's, I feel like the most important thing that we can possibly do, we can spend millions and millions of dollars building the greatest cybersecurity apparatus for space that you could imagine, with post-quantum crypto and with ephemeral tokens for authentication that are time-based and all of these logs for access. It doesn't matter if I compromise someone on the inside of the organization. If I'm a threat actor and I compromise someone in your organization, or I compromise the device of someone who's already inside and I'm watching everything that they do. So the best thing that we can do to secure space is educate human beings, educate the people that are working on this technology. And that can actually be a challenging thing to do. I mentioned that NASA has a newish cybersecurity head. And I was reading an article about them recently where they were talking about the challenge of language at NASA and the challenge of gaps in NASA's culture understanding the language of cybersecurity and understanding the behaviors of cybersecurity. And so you can also create policies for people to follow, and you can give them huge guidebooks, but it doesn't matter if there's not buy-in. It doesn't matter if there's not use and kind of consistent vigilance. So that's why I'm going to keep coming back to education. I'm going to keep coming back to people and the human element when I talk about this. Another interesting story, in I think 2018, we know because the FBI has told us that in 2018 there was some ground station computers were breached at a commercial satellite provider, a large commercial satellite provider in the US, by an Iranian group that was sponsored by the Iranian government, so Islamic extremists, essentially. And the way that they did it wasn't through breaking the encryption or recording. It was through using a hacked forum for the satellite industry to convince people to click on a phishing link, which was the phishing link was even in broken bad English. It was something like best app for tracking of satellite or something. I don't think that was exactly it, but it was something like that. And we know about that because someone got suspicious of that link and reported it to the FBI. And as a result, then we don't know who it was, which satellite operator it was, because that hasn't been disclosed. But we do know that these Islamic extremists were able to access their computers, to access some computers on the ground to see what people were doing, to steal some information. And that wouldn't have happened if someone hadn't clicked on best app for tracking of satellite, Right. And right. We know about it because someone did the right thing and disclosed. So the like if I could give our audience just one takeaway, when you're working with an organization at any scale, we're a small space startups. You could be working at NASA or the Air Force. If you're working at any organization at any scale, there's hopefully someone like me or some official channel that you can go to say, I saw something unusual and I think that you should know about it. We've had Soulstar we have a contact with the FBI because they're very, very interested in space. They're very, very interested because we're working on a really cool project that I can't say too much about, but it's with a major aerospace company, and it involves manned deep space exploration. And you can probably guess the area of that because there's one big area of interest in the world right now. But in the course of working with them, we were approached by the FBI, and the FBI said, we want to set up channels for you to share information with us, for us to educate you guys on how to deal with these kinds of threats that you may be looking at. And so that, like I said, my number one takeaway for people, like as a human, I can talk, we could do, like I said, multiple sessions. We could do a session to talk about encryption. We could do a session to talk about authentication and security frameworks. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Right.
If you have one takeaway from what I'm saying today, it's that you are the weakest link. Manage your passwords well. Tell your IT people and your cybersecurity people if you see something suspicious, even if it seems inconsequential. And provide avenues for people to tell you when there are problems with your technology. The number one way that we find out about flaws in technology is because of third-party security researchers, people who just love to break technology. And if we give them a productive outlet for that love, they will share what they find with us. And it's when we don't, especially when we're talking about younger people, teenagers, there's been many, many stories that we could go into of teenagers hacking for fun, compromising something, having no productive way to share that information or do anything with it other than to sort of be vandals or to try to extort money. You can incentivize people to share their findings with you that as an organization. That's one of the number one things you can do to protect yourself, actually. So,
that's great. So what other things can organizations be doing to secure spacecraft?
Well, so there's certainly no one other thing, but I think that the one of the major important things I think is going to be authentication. Is going to be knowing, like I said, I can go out and build a ground station now for a few $100s, and I can start recording radio signals from satellites. I can start tracking their position. I can start trying to communicate with them. So if I can do that, anyone can do that. So I think that it's important that our assets in space are talking to the ground stations that they're authorized to talk to, that there are authentication methods that allow a satellite, really clearly to know, okay, I'm authorized to talk to this ground station. So in the technology that we're developing at Soulstar, which we're providing a VPN and an API solution for our customers to interact with assets in low Earth orbit, which is very cool. And we could do a whole other session on that. One important, we don't want to rely on just a password to have you authenticate through the VPN and authenticate to your equipment. If your password is compromised, then anyone can talk to your equipment in space. And so a really cool framework, a thought framework for security that I've encountered recently that I'm trying to adopt when I think about these kinds of things was created by the former security chief at Bank of America. And it's called DIE, D-I-E, which stands for Distributed, Immutable, and Ephemeral. And you're probably familiar with security tokens that are distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. If you've ever used, say, two-factor authentication with Google, you get a one-time password. It's time-based. It expires. It's a series of numbers. if I steal that from you, a minute after you use it, it's totally useless to me. Mm-hmm. So I think that one thing that satellite providers can be, and I think are doing, most people in this industry are doing, is providing really solid, modern kinds of authentication methods and identification verification, ID verification of who is using the device. And again, as I said, we could deep dive into that. We could deep dive into something I said earlier, which is post-quantum cryptography, which is also another thing that you'll hear people talking about a lot. If you send a satellite up that has some kind of a hardware that can only use classical cryptography as we understand it today, and IBM delivers on their recent, I think, very ambitious promise to deliver a quantum computer with thousands of qubits in the near term future. We're looking at a world where that asymmetric encryption that we use to secure our communications is not as secure as we're used to feeling like it is. And that affects everybody. That affects you when you log into your bank account from your desktop. It also will affect satellite communications. But as I said, someone recently said to me, in space, only software can repair. If you're talking about an asset in low Earth orbit, you're not going to spend, however many thousands of dollars it is to send in, millions of dollars it is to send an astronaut up there to correct the problem. So, again, something you're going to hear in any organization from your security people: keep your software patched, keep it up to date. Yeah. We need to make sure that we're doing that with satellites. We need to make sure that we're detecting vulnerabilities in satellites. We're patching those vulnerabilities. So as satellite operators, it's similar to securing IoT devices on Earth: strong encryption, strong verification, strong authentication, and good user practices, and
yeah, good. So, and you already kind of touched on this a little bit, but what is Soulstar doing to ensure that our company's space-based Wi-Fi access points and space communicators are secure?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and I love that question. So what our technology is really doing is, as I said earlier in this talk, allowing people to treat their missions as a collection of IoT devices. In manned spaceflight, our Wi-Fi access points are going to act just like the access point at your house. And that probably means, astronauts might use them to connect their laptop and do some work, but there's going to be a whole lot of devices using that connection. And as we know, I would say that IoT is almost notorious for being hackable, for having security flaws. We have stories of, as I said earlier, security researchers being able to seize control of cars with computers in them. There was a hacker in New York who hacked her own pacemaker and was able to pair her phone over Bluetooth to her pacemaker, which is actually really scary if you think about the capability that gives someone with malicious intent.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So what we want, like I said earlier, we want to provide an API for people to work with. We're not just providing a VPN. If you go to an office building with your work laptop, you have some assumptions about the network that you're connecting to. You assume that the IT department, and this may or may not be true depending on the organization, but you assume that the IT department is monitoring that network for threats, that it has created network segments which have firewalls that are limiting access to devices that shouldn't have access to one another. Like, if I come in and join your guest network, I'm not going to be able to access the accounting server. I'm not going to be able to access your source code server, or whatever you have that's secure, that needs to be privileged. And then within the organization, you don't necessarily want the accounting department to be able to access the source code server, that's called the principle of least privilege. You only want people to have access to what they have access to. So we definitely want to make sure that our solutions are the same, we definitely will find ourselves in situations where we have multiple customers with devices that are connecting to our network, because we're creating an IP-based network. We're just doing it in space, just like your router does at home, then your Wi-Fi access points do it at work. And there could be lots of devices, different experiments, whole different stakeholders, different customers connected to that, and we don't want them to be able to cross-contaminate with each other. So,
of course,
our space communicators and our Wi-Fi access points need to know what devices they're talking with, and there's a whole range of technology that goes into that. Again, we could deep dive into the technology someday. That would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So let's definitely plan to do that. Thank you so much for being here today and giving us this overview of, how space can get hacked and what we're doing to secure it.
No, thank you, Lisa. It was lots of fun. And I look forward to doing more of these.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian.